was a devastating professional snub for Andrews. Around the same time, director Robert Wise was searching for his Maria Von Trapp and wasn't yet sold on Andrews. That changed when a Disney executive showed him an unfinished cut of Mary Poppins. Wise reportedly decided on the spot to sign her before any other studio could. Andrews accepted a flat fee of $225,000, about $2.28 million today, with no royalties or box office participation. By contrast, Mary Martin's stage deal had earned her more than $8 million from Broadway profits, since Fox didn't consider Andrews established enough to warrant a back-end deal. That decision proved costly for the studio's reputation, if not its bottom line. Mary Poppins became a massive hit, earning Andrews an Academy Award for Best Actress, and during her acceptance speech, she pointedly thanked Jack Warner, the very executive who had passed her over for My Fair Lady. Even though The Sound of Music went on to gross hundreds of millions worldwide, Andrews never received a cent beyond her original fee. Casting Captain Von Trapp proved just as difficult. Robert Wise considered Sean Connery, fresh off his star turn as James Bond, along with Richard Burton and even Bing Crosby, but none felt right for the role. Christopher Plummer eventually took the part, but reluctantly. He found material overly sentimental, privately mocking it as The Sound of Mucus, and turned the role down multiple times. Wise flew to London to convince him in person. Plummer agreed only on the condition that he could help deepen the character, pushing for more nuanced dialogue and a solo song to express the captain's inner life, which is how Edelweiss, written specifically for his character rather than an authentic folk tune, ended up in the film. Even after reshaping the role, Plummer struggled with the production. He later admitted to drinking during filming, including during the emotionally charged farewell concert scene. Despite his private discontent, his performance carried real depth, transforming the captain from a rigid disciplinarian into a loving father in a way audiences embraced. Like Andrews, Plummer had signed a flat contract with no royalties, even as the film went on to earn more than $286 million worldwide. Adding to Plummer's frustration, most of the singing in the film wasn't actually him. Professional vocalist Bill Lee, who had also provided vocals for Disney films like Sleeping Beauty and Mary Poppins, performed extended sung portions, including much of Edelweiss. Producers doubted Plummer could meet the vocal demands and didn't want to take the risk. Plummer was reportedly furious about the decision, though the dubbing was seamless enough that most audiences never noticed. He remained openly critical of the film for years, only later admitting it had grown on him with time and distance. The search for the younger cast members brought its own surprises. A 20-year-old Mia Farrow auditioned 3 times for the role of Liesl, but was passed over, with casting notes reportedly describing her as sweet but lacking spark or dancing ability. The role instead went to Charmian Carr, who, despite playing a 16-year-old, was actually 21. Losing the role didn't hurt Farrow's career. She went on to star in Rosemary's Baby shortly after. For the role of Friedrich, a young Kurt Russell auditioned, along with Patty Duke and Terry Garr, but the part ultimately went to Nicholas Hammond, who would later become the first live-action Spider-Man on television in 1977. The remaining Von Trapp children were chosen after months of exhaustive auditions, and the resulting cast reportedly formed close, lasting friendships that endured for decades. One of the film's most romantic moments, the gazebo love scene between Maria and the captain, nearly fell apart during filming. The culprit was the industrial carbon arc lights used to simulate moonlight, which produced a loud, embarrassing noise every time the actors leaned in for a kiss. Take after take was ruined as the cast dissolved into laughter. Robert Wise eventually abandoned the bright lighting setup entirely and shot the scene in silhouette in front of the gazebo's glowing windows, obscuring the actors' faces and, incidentally, their laughter. The moody, romantic look that resulted was pure accident, born of damage control rather than artistic intention. 20th Century Fox kept the story under wraps for years, until Julie Andrews eventually revealed the mishap publicly. Filming carried real risks beyond studio embarrassment. During the boat scene where the children tumble into a lake, 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played Gretel, nearly drowned after the crew failed to account for the fact that she couldn't swim. When the boat capsized, Andrews, who was supposed to catch her, fell the wrong direction, and Carruth went underwater twice before another actor pulled her out. The now famous opening shot of Andrews spinning through an alpine meadow, Long before Julie Andrews ever twirled through an alpine meadow, the Von Trapp story had already captivated audiences an ocean away. In the mid-1950s, German producer Wolfgang Liebeniner adapted Maria von Trapp's memoir into two low-budget films, released in 1956 and 1957. Sentimental and distinctly European in style, the films nonetheless became the biggest commercial hits West Germany had ever seen, and their popularity spread across Europe and into South America. Audiences everywhere seemed drawn to the same idea: a musical family standing up to the Nazis by choosing love and courage over fear. American studios, however, wanted nothing to do with it. Executives dismissed the films as amateurish, overly sentimental, and too foreign for U.S. audiences, more community theater than cinema. That dismissal might have been the end of the story, if not for one director with a different eye. Vincent J. Donahue, a Tony-winning director scouting projects for Paramount, watched the German films and initially agreed they were clumsy, but he saw something underneath the rough production values, real emotional substance. His verdict was unexpected. This wasn't a film property. It was a Broadway musical tailor-made for the reigning star of the stage, Mary Martin. That single insight set off the chain of events that eventually produced one of the most successful musicals in history. None of it would have been possible if Maria von Trapp hadn't made an early decision that, in hindsight, cost her a fortune. With no agent and no legal guidance, she sold the rights to her life story to German filmmakers in the early 1950s for a flat $9,000, worth roughly $104,000 today. It was a modest sum even by the standards of the time, and it would prove to be a tiny fraction of what her story would eventually generate. When American interests later tried to simply buy the title of her book and build a loosely inspired adaptation around it, Maria refused. She insisted any dramatization be honest and complete, not a sanitized or cherry-picked version of her family's life. By the late 1950s, Mary Martin and her husband, producer Richard Halliday, were determined to bring the story to Broadway. But they couldn't even locate Maria. She was in Papua New Guinea doing missionary work with Father Franz Wasner, the family's former musical director, running clinics and teaching in remote villages. Letters from America piled up at each mission stop, and Maria, uninterested in show business, tore many of them up without opening them. Fate intervened when Maria and Father Wasner returned to the U.S. by ship, docking in San Francisco. Halliday was waiting on the pier and handed her tickets to see his wife perform in Annie, Get Your Gun. Maria went mostly out of politeness and came away genuinely moved by Martin's performance. She had to break the news that the film rights were already sold to the Germans, but she gave the Broadway team her blessing to try anyway. That one offhand permission set the legend in motion. The original plan for the stage musical was modest: blend authentic Austrian folk songs with a handful of new numbers. When producers approached Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein to contribute just a couple of songs, the pair refused to do a partial job. Either they wrote the entire score or they walked away. Rather than mix their material with existing folk tunes, they wanted full creative control. That ultimatum reshaped the entire project. After finishing Flower Drum Song, Rodgers and Hammerstein returned to rebuild the show from scratch with an all-original score, producing now iconic songs like My Favorite Things, Do-Re-Mi, Edelweiss, and Climb Every Mountain. The Sound of Music opened on Broadway on November 16, 1959, at the Luntfontein Theater, starring Mary Martin and Theodore Bikel. The $400,000 production became a sensation, pulling in more than $232 million in advance ticket sales before most audiences had even seen performance. Martin missed only a single show during its nearly 4-year, 1,443 performance run. By 1960, a bidding war erupted for film rights. 20th Century Fox won with a $1.25 million offer, over $13 million in today's dollars, a staggering bet for a studio still reeling from the financial disaster of Cleopatra. Buried in the contract was a clause giving Rodgers and Hammerstein's estate 10% of profits if the film earned more than $12.5 million. Co-writer Howard Lindsay reportedly laughed off the idea that it would ever hit that mark. He couldn't have been more wrong. Julie Andrews had already conquered Broadway as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, but when Hollywood adapted the show into a film, studio executives deemed her not camera-ready and cast Audrey Hepburn instead. despite Hepburn's singing voice needing to be dubbed for most of her numbers. It